Consider issuing a request for qualifications for environmental and engineering services in the San Francisco to San Jose and San Jose to Merced project sections. Mr. Treposis, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Ben Treposis, Northern California Regional Director. I'm pleased to present for your approval the release of a request for qualifications for the completion of environmental and engineering services in the San Francisco to San Jose and San Jose to Merced project corridors. It should be noted that this single review effort will produce two separate environmental documents. You will recall that the authority initiated review of these corridors in December of 2008 with the goal of achieving environmental clearance in the 2009 to 2011 timeframe as a fully built-out independent alignment for high-speed rail in the Bay Area. As you know, since that time, we've embarked on the development of a blended system in the Caltrain Peninsula Corridor and have partnered with the Caltrain Joint Powers Board on the electrification of the Peninsula Rail Corridor. In order to accommodate future high-speed rail service in the Bay Area, it is necessary to complete a follow-on environmental review of both the San Francisco to San Jose and the San Jose to Merced project corridors. Significant work has been completed to date, and this effort will build on that work to complete the environmental review. This RFQ will facilitate that review by enlisting consultant support who, along with the authority and rail delivery partner staff, will complete environmental analysis and achieve a record of decision by December of 2017. The detailed evaluation of the Bay Area corridors will include the following: rail infrastructure and safety improvements in the San Francisco to San Jose corridor, location and viability of passing sidings, any necessary station and platform modifications and improvements at 4th and King, Millbrae, San Jose, and Gilroy stations, initial geotechnical analysis through the Pacheco Pass to the Central Valley Wise. It is important to note that the work currently underway in the Central Valley Wise and north of the Wise will be referenced but not replicated in this evaluation. The budget for this environmental review is $36 million. The work will be completed through a rigorous task order process where the specific activities necessary to achieve a record of decision will be assigned to the appropriate member of the selected consultant team with a detailed budget and schedule associated with each task. This effort will achieve the following milestones: a draft EIR-EIS by November of 2016, a draft final EIR-EIS by November of 2017, and a record of decision, as I mentioned, by December of 2017. Staff will complete the procurement process for this effort according to the schedule outlined in this staff report, with an expectation to award and execute the agreement for consultant services in November of this year. Staff recommends the approval of the release of the RFQ for environmental and engineering services in the Bay Area corridors, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. I do have some, but turning first to my colleagues, let me just go right to left. Any questions? Ms. Perez-Estelano.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for the memo. I just have a question. The timing of the EIR is, you expect to have the EIRs in circulation by fall of next year for San Francisco to San Jose, and then the next segment, winter of 2016. I just want to make sure that these allow, because I'm coming from Southern California and we've had to, make sure that we allow for plenty of public review. I'm just wanting to make sure that we have enough built-in time for community participation and the kind of rigorous involvement that we are accustomed to in the program.
Thank you, Director. Yes, in fact, we're initiating that stakeholder and community outreach in advance of bringing the consultant teams on board. Okay. We've already scheduled community and stakeholder meetings in the Bay Area in the September timeframe. We will be building on those and expanding those. It is really our intent to have at least a year-long conversation with the community before we begin to get into the detail of alternatives analysis and preferred alternatives and the like. This analytical effort can go on in parallel to that community conversation.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Vice Chair Selby.
Thank you for this. This is great. Being in the Bay Area myself, I know that we can be a contentious bunch. And I'm interested in knowing, I know you've got a 2-year time frame basically from the time that you start to the time that you finish. Is there some room, if there's any slippage one way or the other, so that the program and the project can continue as it should? Because I know you're going to be doing some great community work, but there's also other things going on, particularly in the San Francisco area, that I know you're aware of, but I just want to make sure that we have a little bit of buffer there, if possible.
Thank you, Director Selby. We're committed to minimizing the slippage. We are absolutely committed to having a record of decision by December of 2017. Given what we know today, we believe that we can meet that goal. At the same time, we're working with our community partners, certainly with Caltrain, with the City of San Francisco. I'm sure you're alluding to the rail study that is currently underway. Our expectation is, because those efforts are ongoing and very active, that we'll be able to incorporate any outcomes that come from those efforts into our analysis and incorporate it in a way that doesn't affect our schedule.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Curtin.
This is my second meeting, so you'll have to forgive me. But the last meeting, we issued a contract that was very closely contested among two highly qualified firms, and it was a considerable contract. This is not insignificant either, but I just wanted to ask a little bit about the procurement process, the evaluation process. Is this just a sort of a formula that is traditionally used? And I'm looking at the technical evaluation criteria and then the discussion interview evaluation criteria, because to offer, I mean, it seems so just mechanical in terms of the numbers in the last contract that it made me a little concerned, because I'm looking at 30 points out of the technical evaluation for organization, key personnel, and roles. I mean, if a firm doesn't have organization, key personnel, and roles, they probably shouldn't be even at the evaluation point. To offer 30 points for that seems a little high. And I know I'm nitpicking, but what I'm getting at is perhaps you should take a look at the point evaluation and make it more specific to the project itself. Understanding project requirements is pretty important. I gather all that. But it seemed that if you've been through this process, you already know and you have a good understanding of the project. If you're coming from the outside and trying to get in, you may not appear to have the same level of understanding. So these points can be pretty critical among competing teams. So the second point, though, discussion, interview, evaluation criteria, it just basically says it's a carryover from the technical criteria, and that's 60 points. I don't quite understand that, so maybe you can explain that a little bit to me, and why we're offering 30 points for what should be almost entry-level kind of criteria. Past performance seems to me to be very, very critical, and a good review of what's been done in the past would be a high point standard for me. But having the right personnel or the key personnel or enough personnel almost seems like, well, you could be the greatest team on the planet, but if you don't have the personnel, you're not going to be qualified. So I'm wondering if this could be take a look at this for a little bit more focused the way you distribute the points.
Director Curtin, we certainly could look at the way the numbers are allocated. In general, the values that you see here are maximum values, and they're applied by the selection team that's appointed through our authority-adopted process as an opportunity to address the scale that you identified, that each team will have its own discrete level of capabilities and staff and skills that they bring to bear as part of their procurement. In terms of assessing past performance or applying past performance, strictly speaking, we try very hard not to do that in the procurement process, that each procurement is an opportunity for each offerer to submit their skills and interest in the particular procurement anew. Mm-hmm. But we'd certainly be able to...
So you don't stress past performance, which would seem to me, a good indication of future performance.
I would say we do. It's not a specific factor. I mean, so for instance, in the evaluation of the organization personnel and roles, what we're looking for is not just that company A has done this work 10 different places, but we want to actually see the people who are there committing to this project, what their expertise is, what their performance has been in delivering it, meeting the kind of schedules that we want to see happen, that they can integrate with our organization effectively.
So
It's woven into a lot of these factors. It's not a discrete element.
I see that in the second section, which is important, the key staff that you're going to commit. But what I'm sort of missing is, do you bring the skill set that's required for this particular project? And then, of course, are you going to apply your personnel to this project in a fashion that we're comfortable with? So it just seems awfully high to me. And I don't want to nitpick, but we had a very, very close competition last time. And just hoping the right questions get answered, maybe just for the future procurement process as well.
And if I may, part of the way that we're trying to get at the authorities policy, where our CFO, Mr. Fong, helps select the right people for each respective procurement, so we ensure that we have the right level of technical expertise and understanding on the panel for each discrete procurement. So that bringing that level of expertise to bear will help, I believe, address that.
Okay, well, I just wanted to raise it so people start thinking about it, because it seems just very formulaic, 30-30, 30-10. And if there's not a lot of thought in each of those categories, it could be misleading. And we, with these numbers we're handing out, we want to make sure we got the right people in the right place, obviously. So,
Other questions before I raise mine?
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Richards.
Thank you. I have three questions, Mr. Traposis. The first, with regards to the quantitative risk analysis that you mentioned of the schedule and the budget, and which would be performed, and then the management plan development. When will that occur, and how does that impact this whole process, and what's it mean to us?
Part of the expectation is that the consultant team, once on board, will perform that risk analysis as part of their evaluation and really our evaluation of their ability to deliver under the standards that we've established. So they will lay out with us and with support from our RDP team exactly how they'll arrive at that.
So that's after the consultant
Once
has
we
been
see their
selected?
plan for delivering and meeting the schedule, we do that risk analysis then and determine whether we're comfortable with what they're doing or whether we believe we need to make changes in that approach.
Okay, I think I may have stepped over you in my ears here. So is that done before the contract has been executed, or is that after the contract's executed with the consultant?
After the contract.
After. Okay, and so we're confident that after having made that selection that whatever comes of this is a matter of just ensuring that they are compliant with the goals and necessities of what we have to do, move the project forward.
Yes, the evaluation criteria above, including understanding of project requirements, things, each of the proposers will have to commit to meeting the schedule and provide their plan for doing it. What the risk analysis will do will then really do the deep dive into the
Okay, that's what I really wanted to hear. Thanks. The second one, it really gets to my colleague, his discussion of the points. What concerned me in looking at this was in the second set of numbers that really up to 60% of the 100 or 60 points are really a carryover from the statement of qualifications. So it seemed to me that it kind of undervalues the importance of the evaluation through the actual presentation portion. So I'm not sure of how that occurred either. I think that's part of what you were talking about also. I'm not sure what, it seems like it de-emphasizes the importance of this portion of the selection process.
Well, we're certainly, as I mentioned, willing to look at the allocation of the scores. But again, I want to emphasize that those are maximums as they're applied by the panel.
Is it just because you just generally don't put that much weight on the oral presentation?
There is, right, if you look, the combination is there's a combined heavier weight on the submitted materials, and that's intentional. I think it's consistent. We want to see, I'll look at the other way. We don't want to be wowed by a slick presentation necessarily, and so we want to really make sure that they understand the project, they put the work into compiling and assessing the team members, developing the approach. The interview is really then meant to make sure that we understand what they've proposed, that they're committed to what they're doing, that they've actually that give us the chance to interact with the people that they're proposing, the key players. So there is an intentional heavier weight overall on the statement of qualifications portion.
So if we were to act on this today and you were willing to consider a change in the breakdown of that's identified here, that would need to be incorporated somehow in the motion, right?
Right, because we'd need to put that out in the RFQ.
Okay. And then finally, I'm trying to understand the role of the CEO in all of this, which is below where we talk about the selection committee will recommend the top-ranking offer to the authority CEO, and then it then goes on to state that the top-ranking offerer will be the one who's selected. So I'm not quite sure what your role is, Jeff.
Is that a general statement? Or
Depending on your answer.
If you want to cover it that way, sure.
That's really just a process of then bringing it forward to the board for its approval. I don't second guess the panel unless I see something that just looks abjectly wrong.
And does this give you the authority then to second guess? I mean, if you think that it's wrong?
If I can certainly go back and question the panel about if there's a discrepancy in scores that looks odd or something like that, but I'm not participating directly in the procurement.
Okay. I guess from my own perspective, I'd rather see you have a more active role. We've often talked about just wanting to make sure that we've got the most capable people sitting on these selection committees, and that we see that as part of your role also, at least I do. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Oh, yes, Ms. Schenk.
By the way, I would take that as a vote of confidence.
Yeah.
So my concern really just echoes what Catherine has brought up, and that there are two major ongoing issues. One is timing, and the other is cost. And I just want to make sure that we have the adequate staff, both in terms of number as well as own qualification, to oversee this process.
Thank you, Director Schenk. We believe that as we bring this consultant team on board, as I mentioned, in partnership with authority staff and RDP staff, rail delivery partner staff that we have in place, we do in fact have the team that can deliver the record of decision on the schedule that we've identified. At the same time, we have a significant body of work that's already been established, certainly from San Jose to the Central Valley Wise, that we'll build upon. And in the Caltrain corridor, as you know, the Caltrain Joint Powers Board is moving forward with their electrification project, their design-build project, and we have a good amount of information already established there. So we believe that we're in a position where we can do just that, and we do have the right people on board, and will have with adding this team.
Okay, but having been through more than a few of this kind of process, I would like you to be very skeptical. I would like you to be looking at this with a pretty jaundiced eye about slippage and timing, rather than sort of a glass half empty rather than half full. That's always served me well.
Well, I certainly like to be optimistic. Part of the reason that we're taking the task order approach to this effort is that so we can rigorously drive the activities that will happen on this corridor, that we establish clear schedules and clear costs for each of the activities that we need to get to a record of decision. So it's through that effort, that rigorous oversight, that we expect to keep both our schedule and keep our costs down.
I, for one, would like to have very regular reports, granular reports on timing, rather than just say, well, we've got the schedule, and yes, we're adhering to it. I'd like to sort of get down in the weeds on
And
it.
I'd be happy to provide those.
Thank you.
Just on that point, we're developing a reporting mechanism through the Finance and Audit Committee that will provide information to the full board
Great.
on the pace of the environmental work.
Thank you.
And so that you will see that. And I would also just point out that this proposal and the way we've put it together and the way we'll administer it takes into account the revised structure we have with the rail delivery partner and the capabilities that they bring. It will, frankly, be a much more efficient, more focused environmental process than we've had before, and which will help us meet the schedule and make sure that we have adequate public participation in it at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to my questions now. First, I want to say, just for context, so Ben, I don't want you to get the wrong impression here, because I think all of us have, tremendous confidence in you. But I really want to drill down on this because, all of our contracts are important, but the environmental analysis is the long pole in the tent for developing the northern initial operating segment of the two IOSs that we look at. And so we can't do anything until we have the environmental clearance done. We can't access the bonds. We can't move forward with the project. So the efficiency with which this is done is very, very important to the overall project. So I think it merits the kind of analysis and questions that you've been hearing from board members today. So on that point, I have about 4 questions. So my first question is, it picks up on what the CEO just said. Who is managing this effort once this team is brought on board?
At the end of the day, I'm the accountable manager for
I
the program.
understand that,
As
but,
part of the
you have a
team.
lot. You have a lot of responsibilities.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to understand who's going to be whose job is it from the time they get to work in the morning till the time they leave to be in charge of this particular process?
My deputy director, Lillian Hames, helps me lead the effort on the ground. Each project section, San Francisco to San Jose and San Jose to the Central Valley Wise, will have an individual project lead, project manager, to manage the day-to-day activities on those efforts. And their teams they'll have specific teams dedicated to just the delivery of those project segments.
Okay, and the reason I ask this question is that it strikes me, picking up on comments made by Ms. Perez-Estelano and others, and I'm familiar enough with environmental analysis, there is the technical part of it that is meeting all the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act. And then there is the other part of it that involves public engagement and making sure that there is, full participation. And then there's the other part of it, which is the project management part, which says this is part and parcel of a larger, if you will, PERT chart of how this project's getting built. And so all those things need to be accomplished simultaneously. So I guess what I'll be looking for, and I don't expect you to answer it today, is where does the emphasis lie? Is this going to be a person who is just an overall project management person? Is this going to be a person who has specific expertise in CEQA analysis or whatever? So I think it's going to be very important for us to understand how the management of this is taking place, because little things that slip are going to multiply and add up. So that's my first comment on that. I don't know if you want to.
No, if I may, Mr. Chair, I would answer that in part by saying that we have every expectation to bring all of our resources to bear. We have program management staff and support here in Sacramento that are part of the Northern California team. There are technical experts on the rail delivery partner team that are part of the Northern California team. Obviously, they are participating in other parts of the program, but we have all of our resources, or we intend to bring all of our resources to bear as part of this effort.
Well, let me channel my inner Mike Rossi, even though I ran out of the house without my pocket square this morning. But I think he would say if everybody's in charge, then nobody's in charge. So, I think we need a more specific sense of, yes, of course, there's got to be multiple resources, but somebody needs to be in charge of this effort who's accountable to the CEO and to us to make sure that this thing is moving forward.
At the end of the day, that's me. But on the ground, it is, I have specific individuals who will be managing each project section.
Okay. Second thing is, my next two questions both get to the issue of balance. Ms. Perez-Estelano raised the issue of, getting public engagement, making sure we have time for public engagement. I want to do all that, but I also want to make sure that the schedule that you've laid out gets met. And just one small thing, but we're saying that we're going to have a very strong emphasis on the schedule. I appreciated the clarity with which you laid that out, but I note that that's a 2-year schedule and it's a 3-year contract. Now, I'm just saying that if I'm a contractor and I've got a 3-year contract, I have a different mentality than if I'm a contractor and I have a 2-year contract if there's a 2-year schedule. And I do understand that we don't want to be ridiculous about it because things do happen and things slip. But I would just ask the staff to go back and consider whether or not it's appropriate to have a 3-year contract for a 2-year schedule.
But the reason for having the length of the contract exceed is there's work that needs to be done after the rod is secured, where we need the team that has helped secure the rod to be able to answer questions and provide support beyond it. It's not intended, obviously, to relax the schedule. I'll just tell you, you'll note in the memo we have not later than dates.
I do.
Our intent is to, in fact, beat those schedules. But we do need to make sure we have the consultant available to perform any necessary follow-up work, clarification, et cetera, after the case. That's what we've done on the other environmental contracts, and that's the reason for the difference in time.
Okay. I mean, that's fair.
And that would be, as has been the case in other segments, it's a greatly, greatly reduced level of effort then on their part post-ROD.
Okay.
It's, again, just to be a resource.
Well, I think I'm also trying to communicate to the prospective contractor community that we have a certain mindset in mind. And so I want to make sure that they're locked into that. And then finally, penultimate question is, how can I get comfortable with the work that has to be done here as compared to the work that's already been done? And I understand some of that probably needs to be refreshed and so forth, but it does seem to me that given the length of time in which we've been dealing with these environmental questions, that there's a great opportunity for kind of going back and reinventing the wheel. And I understand that the staff report here says, well, we're going to build on that and we're going to do all this other stuff, but especially if you're assembling a team and it includes people from the rail delivery partner who maybe weren't here before, how do we get comfortable knowing that this contractor is not going to be going back and doing stuff that's already been done? Who's forcing the integration to really look at what that baseline is and what next needs to be done? Because I think this is, somebody once said that any fool can build a bridge. It takes an engineer to build a bridge that barely stands up, meaning that, uses only enough materials to not overdo it. We want to have an absolutely comprehensive and well-done EIR. I don't want to spend 5 years doing the EIR because then we're just getting chewed up. So where's that integration take place? Who's really going to make sure that this is done as efficiently as possible, not reinventing what's been done before?
Mr. Chair, I couldn't agree with you more. What we are going to do at the outset of this agreement is have that conversation with the selected consultant team. There, as I mentioned, there's a great deal of work that's already occurred between San Jose and the Central Valley Wise. The work that occurred between San Francisco and San Jose initially was the full build-out work. So what we're building on is the environmental review and the electrification project that's currently underway that Caltrain is leading. The important point here is that whether we're looking at the San Francisco to San Jose project section or San Jose to the Wise, we have comparatively a relative few options that we are able to look at. We're going to drive the process. Again, part of the reason that we've taken this task order approach is to really emphasize the fact that we have a fairly narrow window in terms of what we can build and where we can build it. The Caltrain corridor is the Caltrain corridor. We're staying substantially within that right-of-way. San Jose to Gilroy has essentially the Union Pacific right-of-way or somewhere adjacent to it, and Gilroy to the Central Valley is roughly the 152 corridor. Much of that work, certainly San Jose to the Central Valley wise, it has gone as far as the Checkpoint B process, so it's fairly well advanced work. So much of that direction has already been done, and our direction to the consultant team, the authorities and the rail delivery partners' direction will be, we've done that, we've established these baselines, we're working clear forward, not, as you suggest, starting from scratch.
Now, is there somebody on your team who's been through those earlier things who can sit there and say, we have done this, and point to things in those documents?
Besides me? Yes, there are several.
Well, I'm just thinking that you've been with this for several years, but I mean, some of this stuff predates you. That's what I was really referring to.
Well, thank you, and what I'm referencing is my last life with the city of San Jose. I was engaged as San Jose's point person on high-speed rail through all of those community meetings and all of that outreach and all of the discussion about the alignments and how it was going to come through San Jose and how the corridor was going to work. And I'm trying to apply some of those lessons learned as much as possible from my perspective, but we also have team members. And really look, one of the criteria that I think we'll look for in the teams are teams that can express some of that understanding and experience.
But Mr. Chair, if I could just, an important element in all this, again, is the front-end work that we will do within the authority and with the RDP as a partner to really define the project and then assign the task to go out and clear that and do what's necessary to clear it.
Okay.
And so it's going to be much more rigorous on the front end of the process, which I think will help address a lot of the issues. That's the intent, is to really redesign how we do this process.
Okay. And I mean, I think what you're hearing from me and my colleagues is just, to really make sure that the attention is paid to this, because this is an opportunity to really do a very good EIR efficiently, or to come back a year from now and find out that we've got huge problems and things are languishing. And I want to just, my last point, I want to pick up on the point that Mr. Curtin raised, because I think it's important, and I think he raises a very important point that's difficult, and this is where we talk about balance. It strikes me that for an area like this, doing environmental analysis, there's a limited universe. It may not be a small universe, but there's a limited universe of companies that provide these kinds of services, and they have track records. And I'm very familiar in the public sphere, particularly on the energy side, with environmental analyses that have gone horribly wrong and have led to projects spending 3, 4, 5 years at the Public Utilities Commission, for example, without being able to get a certified EIR. So I do think that past performance is important, and I think that there are probably some companies out there who have, a pretty dismal track record, time after time, of getting behind, maybe not having the right people on it. And it's not that we're going to be able to, even if we wanted to, debar them from public work, but I don't want to be the next victim either. And so I really want to emphasize that I think in the evaluation process, asking people how they have addressed complex situations like this, what they've done to maintain schedule, to maintain integrity, whether or not their work product stood up to the inevitable challenges, the legal challenges and others. So I don't think it really makes sense for us to tell you to change the point criteria, but I would say that in adopting this, I'd like to ask the staff to just go back one more time and really take a hard look at that. Because, again, this is a long pole in the tent, and getting the right person here could make a difference of a year or more in terms of our ability to move forward on this project. And I do think that sometimes public agencies put on blinders to what has happened with companies in their past work with public agencies, and I don't think that we need to bind ourselves to that. So it's really just expressing my opinion on this, but it was prompted by Mr. Curtin's statements, which I think go to the heart of something very important. Mr. Morales.
First, I'd ask Mr. Filens if he could comment whether, I just want to make sure we don't have any legal restrictions or anything else in terms of looking at past performance.
That's why I asked you to go back and look at it, because I didn't want to be prescriptive, because I figured there were probably some limitations.
Right. I think there may be, but I would say perhaps we could, whether it's just built into the understanding of the board or whether we modify the resolution to note that these criteria will clearly specify addressing similar issues on previous projects. Build these things into these scoring.
Or maybe the way to do it is to recharacterize it as demonstrates an ability for demonstrated a problem-solving ability or an ability to address, complex situations like this or something, where basically they have to come forward and say, this is what we were able to do on this. Mr. Curtin, did
I
you
thought
want?
your comment on the legal track record was pretty spot on as well, because, if there's a history of losing in court on your analyses, that's pretty important to know ahead of time.
Yeah. Mr. Flens, you don't have to say anything, but if you'd like to, you can. Why don't you say it into the microphone? Your words are too important to be lost to posterity. Yes, thank you. I was thinking posterity.
Mr. Chairman and board members, there is no restriction on looking at past performance, and typically in these types of procurements evaluations, you look at past performance. And in fact, oftentimes they're set up so that references must be submitted as part of the evaluation process, and then staff calls the references, asks a lot of rigorous questions, gets information about prior experience. So that is very typical in these types of procurements, to go through and look at past performance and actually talk to the public entity officials, or even in the private entity owners who worked with these companies and saw the performance and can give honest comment back to them.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? If not, pleasure of the board. Tom, did you want to add anything?
Only that I just don't want you to underestimate the value of the oral presentation. I find it over the course of time, the difference between what appears on paper and what is in reality, and especially when you're dealing with a consulting firm, in this instance, is going to be so directly involved with dealing with stakeholders in the public. So I think it really merits your strong consideration of the importance of the oral presentation.
Yes, sir.
Chair?
We'll incorporate that.
Is it possible that we just ask staff to kind of take all of the comments and issues that we've raised, and that you incorporate that into the process, so that we have a kind of comfort level, and maybe he comes back and shares? Because I don't think we want to interrupt with the timeline, because they're clearly on a timeline, but we also want to make sure that the issues that have been raised are addressed.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's what I was trying to get at before when I said I didn't think it was appropriate for us to try to be prescriptive in the resolution, but that I would ask the staff in good faith to take these comments under advisement, and, before you issue the final point scoring, before you do this, to, if you guys come back and say we've thought about it and we want to proceed as, well, then that's fine. You're accountable for the result at the end, but if you think about it a little bit more and want to make some adjustments or change wording, that's fine. But I think we're on the same page, Ms. Perez-Estelano, which is not to be prescriptive in the resolution, but to ask and expect the staff to just reflect on the thoughts from the board today.
I'll second.
Okay. So it was moved by, I think, Mr. Curtin. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, hold on one second. I'm sorry, Mr. Morales was raising a point.
Let me just say, I think we want to make sure we reflect what the board does, but also make sure that the board action then ties with what we ultimately do. And so if what I would suggest is in the resolution, we include some sort of direction, some latitude to reflect past performance and oral presentations, but not making a material change to what's been presented here.
Well, I guess I think what you're asking is, if now that this document's been presented to us, if you change something, are you putting yourself at risk? I don't see anything. I mean, I think the resolution would be the operative.
Well, but I believe the RFQ has the scoring in it, right? So.
But that hasn't been issued yet.
No, but you're giving us approval to issue the RFQ.
And
So I just want to
possibly
make sure
change
we have
that,
the
okay.
latitude to change it.
Okay.
Consistent with board direction, that's all.
So let me just take a quick second here, sorry. Board of Qualified Teams. Issuing a request for
I mean, it may be
qualifications.
covered already, so it would make appropriate, and if the board concurs that
Yeah,
a slightly higher weighting on the interviews, for instance, would not be a substantive change, then I think we're okay with the business.
just give me 1 second. So, authority staff is to make, well, see, somebody could argue that they're not non-substantive. Authorized, well, let's just strike the word non-substantive. Is authorized to make, strike all, is authorized to make appropriate changes to the request for qualifications part of the procurement process. I think that,
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that you could list some of the changes that you have
I know, but then we're going to
discussed.
spend the next 20 minutes on
Yeah.
wordsmithing. I'm trying to, as we want to do with this contract, I'm trying to be as efficient as possible.
Right.
So I was just thinking, Tom, if we just said on that last sentence, authority staff is authorized to make appropriate changes to the request for qualifications as part of the procurement process, then Mr. Morales and the staff could decide, based on this conversation today, whether they want to make any changes. I think the word non-substantive, I mean, I understand that, but appropriate and non-substantive are probably...
I think that covers it.
Yes,
covered.
appropriate. I think I agree with that. That should do it.
Yeah, and so that gives you the latitude to do what you need to do, and the board has authorized you to make those changes. Okay? So if the maker of the motion will accept that as a friendly amendment, we, in the last sentence, strike the word all and the word non-substantive.
Let me think about that, yes.
Okay?
And I'll second that.
All right, so
Amendment.
so it's been moved by Mr. Curtin, seconded by Ms. Perez-Estelano. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Schenck,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Perez-Estelano,
Yes.
Vice Chair Selby,
Yes.
Director Correa,
Yes.
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Chair Richard.
Yes. Mr. Trapostis, I just want you to remember that it is indifference that is the opposite of love, not anything else. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank
Did you just make that up?
No, I heard that someplace. That's true. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. I think that's true. Ms. Rivera, I know you're